Welcome to Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, the podcast standing with you from a family like yours, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B, and in partnership with Balancing Life's Issues. This episode is brought to you by Sanofi. Sanofi is committed to working with the hemophilia community to shed light on the unmet needs of people living with hemophilia and to advance the hemophilia care paradigm to go beyond treating bleeds. I'm your host, Kai, and today we are here to shed some more light on the stories of women in the CHB community. Now, you may have heard our episode with Dr. Nance, which took more of a clinical perspective on women in the CHB community. So today we're piggybacking off that to bring out the stories of women in the CHB community who live with it every day by offering a unique perspective and a message of hope that you're not alone. On August 8th, 2024, Ashley Zebley spoke about her experience as a woman living with hemophilia B at the Eternal Spirit Gala. Through this speech, Ashley highlights her personal journey of resilience in battling a lifelong bleeding disorder while facing gender bias and medical neglect, things far too familiar to the CHB community. However, despite repeated neglect from healthcare providers, she continues to fight for better care, not only for herself, but for her daughter Madeline and other women with similar conditions. She is determined to change the narrative for women with bleeding disorders, and we're so honored to have her on today's podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley and Madeline. How are you guys today?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing okay. And Madeline, how are you today?
I'm good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here to share your stories and your message. And, we're going to get into a lot of things, but I wanted to start with you, Ashley. That was such a powerful speech you delivered at the Eternal Spirit Gala on August 8th. So as you sit here today, what sticks out to you about that moment? And, do things feel better? Are they the same? Are they worse? Where are you at today?
Yeah, thanks for having us. I would say things are absolutely trending upward for me from a few different standpoints. I'm feeling like I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm validated. Since then, I've been able to obtain a treatment plan and medication.
Wonderful.
I've also identified an entirely new side of myself, and just this fire inside of me to do more in this sort of advocacy space. So since the gala, I've actually had a number of people reach out to me, whether those are patients, organizations they're just looking for more information on my story. They want to share stories of their own, and there's people out there that are wanting to help advocate.
That's so wonderful to hear, because it really is highlighting the purpose of the Coalition for Hemophilia B, right? It's this idea of advocacy and how being vulnerable in that moment to share your story has now opened up other people to feel that they can be vulnerable as well. So, Ashley, in our episode with Dr. Nance, we talked a lot about the challenges that are unique to women in a clinical setting. What challenges continue to stick with you today concerning all of this?
Yeah, so since the gala, I was actually able to fly out to Arizona and had my first visit with Dr. Nance. It was an experience like none of the other experiences I've had over the last 20 years. I didn't have to come in ready to fight with her. Instead, she walked in the room. She had an open mind. She was willing to learn. She was compassionate and just had a laundry list of tests that she was willing to run to find out what exactly is wrong with me. Why am I bleeding so much? I walked out of that appointment with a prescription for factor and a treatment plan, so I know when there's an emergency or a surgery exactly what I need to do. I think sometimes when women are told, hey, you're not going to get treatment because your factor level's over 50%, it's not really this black and white line that it's painted to be. When you talk to someone like Dr. Nance, who is what she calls an ultra specialist in hematology, she's able to explain this, whereas other doctors haven't been able to. Because for me, I know that my factor levels have come in at 40, and then at my next visit, they might be 98, and at the next one, they might be 60, and that's without having treatment. And so, textbooks may say that that's not a thing, and that factor 9 levels don't fluctuate. And so that's why we have to continually advocate for ourselves and push the boundaries, right? We can push back and say, hey, I know that that's what's in the book, but if we look at my lab results, that's not really what's happening. So is there maybe a study we can do? Or, I asked Dr. Nance about clotting in women. I had a doctor that didn't want to treat me with factor because she was so worried I was going to throw a blood clot. And the reality of it is I have 2 platelet disorders, hemophilia B, and I'm so low risk for having a clot. But her initial perspective on that right away was, oh my gosh, I have to do a study on this. If that's one of the things keeping women from getting treatment, I should just go study it and present the findings in, a research article. And And I think that's just beautiful when people are willing to go the distance with you and be in the journey with you, because she wouldn't have known otherwise had I not shared my story. And so,
Sure.
it goes back to Kai, your question on how can people advocate? Why should they advocate? Like that's it right there. You could be the reason that an article is written and a woman gets treatment.
Wow. Yeah. That's really great to hear. And I'm not surprised after speaking with Dr. Nance. And it kind of makes us feel like, don't we wish every doctor was like this, right?
Yeah.
As you get into the clinical setting like that. So I guess your experience, being in that clinical setting, maybe at the early parts of discovering, what you were living with, can you kind of help remind us, like, what were some of those challenges you were facing that you saw the opposite side of with your time with Dr. Nance?
Sure. So I had actually gone to two different hemophilia treatment centers in the past, um, really since I was 12 years old, like I talked about in the story. And during that time, there would be cases where, I was referred to as you're just a carrier. And then I was kind of upgraded to a symptomatic carrier. And then I'd be told, okay, you have hemophilia, but then we'd revert to no, you don't have it. And so it was this ball game of just bouncing it back and forth and back and forth. And so sometimes I'd be prescribed treatment. Other times I wouldn't, and it would be almost what felt like being withheld from me.
Mm-hmm. And and I guess when it comes from the women's perspective, right? So that could be the experience for anybody living with hemophilia B in a clinical setting. But what in particular, as a woman, kind of things were you dealing with going into that clinical setting?
Sure. So for me, at an early age, it really started with my menstrual bleeding, right? So at 12 years old, had my first period, and I knew that it was way heavier than it should be. Even that young, it just was not normal. And later that year, I'd go on to have my first knee surgery. And in a healthy 12-year-old, that's just not a normal thing. I didn't have an injury. And so, fast forward, I would wind up having a total of 10 knee surgeries, including a partial knee
Wow.
replacement, because I wasn't recovering from any of the procedures. And what I think back to now is really they didn't take in that I'm not recovering, I'm not healing because I don't have the right bleeding properties and clotting cascade to do that.
Mm-hmm. And so, coming out of those moments in the doctor's office, it had to have been deflating, no?
It was, and it's interesting because now that I'm sort of navigating this new path filled with hope about treating my own bleeding problems, I just have stories pouring in from other women in the battlefield where they're going through exactly what I went through. And it was literally just months ago that I was just ready to give up because you fight for decades and
Mm-hmm.
they dismiss your problems. They say those are normal. Or in talking with a woman last night, it was almost as if it was too much work for the doctor to go research more because hers is ultra rare. It's just wild to me. And I wanted to highlight a part of my speech at the very end where I talk about the ease in getting factor medication, right? Factor medication is something that treats you in an emergency or before a surgery. And I find, it's so much easier to get a narcotic in today's day and age than it is
Mm.
to get something to help clot your blood.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know if hypocrisy is the word, but you can't make sense of it, right? Like how something is so easy and something else can be so hard. And, a lot of that we talk about in the episode about AFPs and the problem with health insurance. And it just feels like the cards are really stacked against you when you're dealing with something that a health care provider is saying as well, you're just too expensive, right? So it's,
Yeah.
I can only imagine what the toll that can take on your mental health.
It, I will tell you, that has really been the most challenging part of my journey. And so, I grew up knowing all about hemophilia since I was really young. I watched my dad, infuse his medicine every other day at the dining table. His joints were very crippled, had a really difficult childhood. And so, I knew what having hemophilia was like for him. But back in that day, even going to NHF, HFA events, the discussions around women hadn't really come into the picture quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
And because that narrative was really all about men, I
Right.
just didn't feel like I had a seat at the table. And so,
Yeah.
even if I did, my bleeding problems paled in comparison to what you could physically see in these people. And so,
Mm-hmm.
even as an adult, it took a lot of years for me to just re-engage in the hemophilia community for that reason. I didn't want to take a seat away from somebody who deserved to be there.
Yeah.
And that's really where that imposter syndrome, it comes in and it eats at you and it tells you you're a fraud, you shouldn't be here. And so It's been amazing to see this culture shift in both the hemophilia community and even just my life to how now we see women with bleeding disorders in this entirely new light, at least from a community perspective. We not only deserve to be here, but we need to be here.
Right, right. So it sounds like it's taken you over the course of decades from an outsider to someone who is integral to the community, and it's really exciting to hear that is, the Coalition for Hemophilia B has helped turn this conversation in that direction. And again, thanks in part to people like you who are willing to go out there, talk on this podcast, right, and speak at events. So and I think as we kind of stick with the mental health conversation, and I think a lot of what we see in today's society is this idea of normalizing the mental health conversation, right? So Ashley, being comfortable to talk to your daughter, Madeline, about how you might be feeling, or like, so I guess between the two of you, when it comes to your mental health, like what are some things that you guys do just as a family to kind of help, I guess, battle, to use the metaphor you've been using, ideas like, feeling alone, depression, imposter syndrome. Like what are some of the things you guys do to help with that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And what I would tell you is that mental health is not a taboo phrase in my household. It is
Nice.
something we talk about regularly. We talk about how there's medication out there, there's counseling available, different ways to cope with things. And so it's just become something that since the girls were really, really, really little, we started to talk about. And so, as one of the girls is going through something or we're going through something, it's not like we have to hide that. We can be
Mm-hmm.
open about it. And so there's times where I'll tell the girls, like, man, I'm feeling really anxious right now. I kind of need to just go sit in a quiet space. And that helps them to see that as an example. It's like, okay, if I need to do that, here's how I put that into words. And
Right.
it's okay for me to go sit and be alone.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really good. As the father of a 1-year old, I'm really inspired by you to put action behind the words, right? So, and it's really impressive to see, because it is a tough conversation for a parent, because it feels like you have to be the foundation, you have to be the rock, and but I have problems too, right? And I need to be
Yeah.
able to find time for myself. So, that's really great to hear. And I think with the mental health conversation, what you do nuclear as a family to like help you get through the day, there's also the Coalition for Hemophilia B. So I guess for you, Ashley, what kind of impact has that had on you? And I guess just maybe take us back a little bit. I mean, your entry was slow into that community. So I guess just remind us about that, and what your role in that community is today.
Yeah, so back then I would kind of just keep an eye out on the Facebook pages. I might jump in on an event once a year, once every couple of years. And, as I started going more, I was meeting people. There were people even local to me that I didn't know about. And so there were these like strong, fierce women, and, they were starting to become very vocal about their experience. And it sounded a whole lot like mine. And so I'd say over the last, 10 years, I've gotten to know these names and these faces, and it's people that you see continually over and over again. It's this consistency, and they're willing to share, and I'm willing to share. And I just love that the coalition fosters a space where we can do that. I think
Mm-hmm.
about the women's retreats I've gone to. They do a chit chat and chocolate every year. So they pass around a tin of chocolate, and, there's tears every single time because
Yeah.
people just open up about their story, and it sounds just like you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just get this sense that you're not alone out there in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was earlier this year that I had to, fire the HTC I was seeing. And it was, I'll tell you, a really emotional visit. You talk about showing emotions in front of your children. Madeline was in the room. It was just, there were tears, there was, loud voices. It wasn't a great experience. And so
Mm-hmm.
after that, I had really said, I'm ready to just throw in the towel, right? I
Yeah.
don't want to go to any more events because I hear about women that get treatments, and clearly that's never going to be me. But I'm really glad that I was brave enough to text some women that I had met through the community, actually. One of those being Kim Phelan, and so she told me, like, girl, you can't give up. That's not an option. And that's where she stepped in when I couldn't be an advocate. She did it for me. And so I just want other women to know that there are people who are ready to stand in that space when they're not. And so it's so important to just reach out and use that resource.
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful story, and such a testament to how hard how hard it is to get to a place and feel like there's nowhere else to go. And then how, I don't know if it was easy at that time, but the act of sending someone a text, something so simple to completely turn around your life. So Ashley, I know that was Dr. Nance was someone else that you met through the CHP community as well, or did that come from somewhere else?
That did. She actually showed up to the women's retreat a few years ago in Arizona with a boot on her foot. She had just had surgery on her, I believe it was her ankle joint. And
Mm-hmm.
so she was up at the front. She was presenting to us. I couldn't believe she even came in that condition. And I heard at that point that she had hemophilia as well. And I was like, whoa, like you're telling me there's a hematologist out there with hemophilia. I was so impressed. And so I
Uh-huh.
would get to see her another time last year at another event, and she spoke, and I connected with her during that session, and told her a story that I had went through with my thyroid biopsy and hemorrhaging in my neck. And she wasn't my doctor, but she was there to provide the compassion and give me advice on, like, here's how to talk to your hematologist, and here's how I would have treated you. And you know it's not always just following the black and white rules, right? It's helping people that aren't getting the care they need. And so it was that moment that I knew I am going to see Dr. Nance one day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you just said that black and white moment, right? So, and I think that's where the fight comes in this conversation. And you've used that metaphor. And like, as we continue to have this conversation, I'm starting to understand what you mean by that. Because you are fighting for your rights, and you're fighting for appropriate care, and you're fighting for your voice to be heard in settings where most of us, myself included, walk in and it's more or less a reliable experience. So I'm so glad to hear that you were able to connect with Dr. Nance on that level. And I know that Dr. Nance is a mouthpiece for advocacy in that, and as are you. So I guess for listeners out there who might be apprehensive about shooting that text or getting more involved in the community, what would be your message to them and to help advocate for one another in a better way?
That's a really great question. I think first and foremost is just share, 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 right? People want to be heard and validated. And if that's not in a doctor's office, there's so many other avenues to do that. I'll tell you, I've heard countless stories from women going through this at conferences, being on Zoom sessions, and just chatting in some of the women's Facebook groups for bleeding disorders. It's a safe place to talk about these topics. And so, it can be hard when you're at work or you're with friends who don't deal with this. And so for them, it can be difficult to empathize with it being,
Mm-hmm.
a medical thing. And I'm someone where, while I'll broadcast my story far and wide, not everyone's comfortable talking about how many tampons they go through
Yeah.
in a room full of men.
Mm-hmm.
And the onus is on us, and we have to foster this community to really drive change because, as we know, a collective voice of us is so much louder than just one person.
Yeah, it's so well said. And I guess coming off of that energy, if you could think back to yourself at Madeline's age, your daughter, what would you want her to know at that point in her life?
I would want her to know, just because you're talking to somebody that has a medical degree, and maybe they spent 15 years studying to do that, and to be in the spot that they're in doesn't mean they know your body better than you do. And
Mm-hmm.
if you feel like something's off, you feel like something's not normal, you don't have to accept no as an answer, right? You
Mm-hmm.
talk to others about it and see what their experience has been. But ultimately, there's a host of doctors out in this country. We're very blessed here in America that you don't have to stick to the one provider that you have. You can move around and find better care. And I wish I had done it a lot faster, to be honest. And I wish that when I was denied getting even carrier tested for my daughters when they were younger, I wish I had fought harder. I wish that I had reached out to the Kim Phalens and the other advocates that already existed to say, hey, can you help me? I can't get through this on my own.
Mm-hmm. It's it's such a beautiful message. And for all the mothers out there who have younger ones, just like advocating for yourself, as well as for others. And Thank you so much again for being here, Ashley. And thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. This has been Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, a podcast standing with you from a family like yours, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B and in partnership with Balancing Life's Issues. For more information on upcoming CHB events, just go to hemob.org and click on Get Involved and then Upcoming Events. And thank you to our guests, Ashley and Madeline. This episode was brought to you by Sanofi. Sanofi is committed to working with the hemophilia community to shed light on the unmet needs of people living with hemophilia and to advance the hemophilia care paradigm to go beyond treating bleeds. This episode of Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B, is made possible in part by the support of CSL. We thank CSL for their continued commitment to the bleeding disorders community. This episode of Boundless B, the Hemophilia B podcast, presented by the Coalition for Hemophilia B, is made possible in part by the support of CSL. We thank CSL for their continued commitment to the bleeding disorders community.